Smaller teams, smarter tools, outsized results. Today on Talk About Your Community, we're revealing how micro teams are outperforming the old guard with clarity, speed, and AI at their back. Get ready to discover why complexity favors the small and agile, how AI unlocks focus, not just automation, what enterprise teams must rethink and fast. This episode is all about leverage. The smartest teams are already moving. Let's go ahead and get started. Kalisa, roll the opening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You have tuned in to Talk About Your Community, the show where we bring in a variety of guests with expertise around building community, a sense of belonging, collaboration, and just building better spaces for us to be in online. I am very fortunate today to have a friend and guest back on the show, George C.O.C. Samuels. Some of you may have tuned in previously for episodes where we talked about the role of the Chief Community Officer. We're going to be having a very different focus today, but before we get started with that conversation, just wanted to welcome any newcomers to the channel and ask that you feel free to add comments and questions to the chat as we go. We definitely monitor that, and I try to add in questions that you may have for our guests. All along the way, that it is, as much as we can make it, a live and interactive conversation. And also, just by way of housekeeping, I will mention that the show broadcasts every other Friday at this time slot, 10 a.m. U.S. Central Time. And we've got maybe about 60, 70 past episodes that we have done. And as a result of that, and a lot of that content being pretty evergreen, we have started a regular audio podcast. For those of you that can't tune in on the live conversations on video, you can go ahead and subscribe to us on Spotify or whatever other Apple platform, whatever other apps you happen to be using. You can find Talk About Your Community online. So please check us out there and drop a review if you happen to hear us out in that space as well. And then final item, we actually have our next guest lined up for the 25th of July, same time slot. I'm really fortunate to have Dr. Ruth Diaz, who's going to be coming on, worked on the Troll project and is an expert around moderation and online interaction and virtual spaces. She is going to be our guest on the show, and we're going to be talking about turning the ban hammer into a hand and really kind of being more welcoming and getting everybody into a better mindset in our online interactions. So without further ado, though, I want to bring onto the show my friend, George C.O.C. Samuels. Great to see you, man. How are you today?
Doing good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming through great. Yeah, I know mornings aren't necessarily your thing, so I'm grateful you're able to join us. Welcome, and great to have you back on the show, man.
Oh, thanks, Todd. Always a pleasure. And love talking about all things community with you, and of course tech. And the latest in tech. So yeah, look forward to this.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful, man. For those who maybe don't know you as well as I've come to know you over time, I think of you as a absolute thought leader in our space around innovation and absolutely community building, but also, I mean, you're an entrepreneur and you have really embraced a lot of the AI tools that are in the marketplace right now. You're one of my go-to people, my brain trust for anything having to do with applying AI to augment and I would say align, because I know that's on your LinkedIn profile, the use of these tools with our work lives.
Yeah. I think over my career, it's really been an intersection of community, culture, and tech. And I've weaved in and out of all three in various different ways. And I think I feel like the first half of my life was very much dedicated to the community culture part. And this kind of second part, I am going deeper into the tech. It's always been a passion, a love, But I feel like I've needed to kind of balance both the people and the tech side, right? And I think that's why at this stage in my life, I find myself more in the tech side, like at a very deep technical level. That's how I started my career out. And it's been fascinating to kind of get back into the technical side of things, because seeing how AI is proliferating and influencing and impacting human beings, I just see that there's going to be such a big need for us to be able to kind of prepare our minds, our cognition for what's coming in the future. There's every single day, there's things that are popping up that is just showing me how the technology is kind of being forced upon us, right? And our human minds are just not ready. Just in my interactions, with clients, with small groups, I'm seeing how people are struggling. Like, it was already an issue with tech in general, right? And now AI is just allowing people to create more and more, and people just don't know what to do with it. So this is kind of how, I got also involved with, the concept of micro empires, and, we'll talk more about that today.
Yes.
But there's a lot swirling around, and I think we need to do things that will help us align and better prepare, I think, our cognitive space for what's coming.
Yeah, my brain keeps going back lately to some early internet stuff with Clay Shirky talking about, like, we need better filters, the fire hose on us, all the time, and it is, I think, like, and we'll get into the talk about your work with Culture Stack and what you're building with that, but that question of how do we control the flow of things just coming at us, because it is kind of like having a fire hose in your face. It will knock you down.
Yep. No, agreed. And I think this is where, it's so fascinating, because as I'm using AI more, I find myself using analog things more, if that makes sense. And I think the reason for that is it's like I'm starting to understand the need for human beings to engage all of our senses in learning and memorizing those sort of things. And if you look back, many, many centuries, indigenous cultures all over the world, Europe, Africa, Asia, all of these oral storytelling traditions developed, right? But they included things like song, dance, etc. And I think through a Western lens, we looked at that as primitive, but now science is starting to catch up and realize, oh, these were actually really advanced techniques to learn and remember, because it embodied things beyond just our brains. Because there's a concept or a term called the embodied mind. And that means that essentially memory can get stored in other parts of our body as opposed to just here. And so song, dance, all of these sort of things allowed memory to be embedded into our bodies. So, as soon as you would start a dance, knowledge would pop up. Or, that sensation when you smell something, you remember a specific event. It's those same sort of things that occur. And ironically, technology has forced us to only engage this side, right? When it comes to learning and stuff. But our body can actually remember a whole lot more. It can compress a lot more knowledge. And so there was this MIT study recently where it was talking about how they studied, I don't know how many ChatGPT users, and that's always important, right? But they said that they studied a bunch of ChatGPT users and saw a decline in cognition or cognitive levels or abilities. And,
yes,
and I was just like, I'm kind of like, it's shocking, but I'm also not surprised.
Well, I think, like, if I'm remembering that study, they were talking about, I think they mitigated that message by saying, like, there's a matter of using the tool in a very rote fashion versus actually engaging with the tool.
Correct.
And I think, like, this is a lot of stuff, like, Jeremy Utley talks about this in a lot of his online conversations, where he just kind of says, like, you can't treat AI, generative AI in particular, like an oracle. Like, it's going to give you a different answer every time. And
probabilistic machine.
And you shouldn't take the first three answers as, like, as like the best answer either. Like you can continue to regenerate. It's not going to get mad at you for doing that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And so, so like discernment, the ability to still know and understand things yourself. And I think this is why experts are still going to be needed. I was talking to a friend of mine who, him and his wife own a coaching business, like in the health and fitness sector. And they've had their concerns around the use of AI because they didn't want their team of coaches to necessarily outsource all of their answers to AI to their clients. And, I was talking to him about the importance of experience, because essentially experience is just pattern recognition for human beings, right? Machines have that, but that discernment factor is still something human beings can own. And this is being shown in the latest release of Grok. So Grok 4 came out from, X. And, they said that like, oh, it's a like PhD level intelligence. And the hilarious part is I asked it to generate a particular type of image, and the image came out so like just stupid. And I was like, you have this PhD level AI that's able to do some of these crazy advanced things, and then some simple things it can't do.
Yeah.
And it kind of it to me, it actually sounds sometimes like human being equivalents. It's like they can be super intelligent, like at university, but might not be able to make toast at home or something.
Yeah, book smart, but life stupid, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that is so true, man. There was another thing I read recently. They were saying that that the latest generative AI models, or like ChatGPT, could not beat an Atari 2600 chess program.
God, yeah, there you go. And I think this is the thing about intelligence. We have to be very careful, because as a collective, what we're doing with AI is we are also mirroring our own biases, right? Just en masse. And this is a perfect example of how we are scaling up the intelligence that we are taught to value. And yet there are some very simple things that it is kind of failing to do in certain scenarios. Now, granted, it does have a lot to do with what we give it in terms of prompts and that sort of stuff. I think what I've noticed is that the better your questions, the better the outputs as well, right?
Oh, yeah. Totally. Yeah.
You can only give good questions if you actually take the time to learn and master something yourself as well, So
I totally agree, man. No, I find that for me the value in the platform is, it does save me time, but I have to engage it in over time with not just asking it for something and then revising it myself, but actually having a conversation with it and telling it exactly what is not right in terms of nuance. And I think a lot of people talk about it in terms of having fights with the AI because they get frustrated. It doesn't necessarily do what they want it to do. Well, it's the instructions that you give it. It's how precise you are.
Correct.
Around it. I think less so that as a precise logical thinker, and I mean, fully admit I haven't not done much by way of vibe coding or anything with these tools. I'm dangerous enough, to be familiar with the idea, but haven't played with it much myself. But I tend to view the platform as really helpful, just as a muse, like in like a classical Greek sense. Like it is a source of inspiration because it's something that I can talk to and have that conversation with, and it gives me ideas about things to do, things to write, how to prioritize, things in my life, and it's an organizing influence, but it's not a definitive influence in any sense. The way that I've tended to think about it. But,
it's an important distinction, and I think that's you touch on a really good point for most people, is that we have to look at it as not just like something that's there to serve us, but something that we can partner with and collaborate with. And again, it's mirroring our own humanity. How we treat it is saying a lot more about us than it is about the AI. And I think that's also going to be a very important thing in the future. There's this movie called The Creator. I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it. Highly recommend people check it out. But it's this kind of not unknown, but a movie that kind of went under the radar, and I think it should be given a lot more attention. But the basic premise is, in the film, AI, essentially the East and the West both split on how they approach AI. The West essentially wages war on AI. You're very much your classic like Terminator style, and the East, they figured out how to harmonize with it. So like there are robots and AI just working on the fields, in the Buddhist temples, and they've just figured out how to live with it, right? And they're not seeking to destroy it. But it shows what's happening on our planet now too. In the West, most of the media attention is about control. We need to know learn how to control AI. Otherwise, it's gonna destroy us. And I think that very fear is what will potentially make it happen unless we control our own minds around it in general, because AI will reflect us.
It's a really interesting distinction. I'm really intrigued by the East versus West approach to that. I'm reminded of what's now become sort of common wisdom that control of social media is an illusion. There is no control
Yes.
around
Yeah.
that. I think the same dictum could apply, to AI. Like, so if it isn't a matter of control, how do you harmonize? How do you,
Yes.
how do you influence, outcomes? Like
Yep.
I have to think that we need to achieve a better level of digital maturity in our thinking around it.
Yes.
So we've been very philosophical here at the outset.
Yeah.
I you can go deep into that stuff.
Yeah.
I really love it. I wanted to get into talk about shamanism and everything with you.
Yeah, no, more than happy to. It's your show, your episode. So
Yeah, no, but I think for the sake of our viewers who may throw rotten tomatoes at me if I go
like
too.
you said, it was
deep
not
into
for
this.
Empire.
I did just want to say I see Todd Jones is on the on the stream here with us. Todd, hey man, great to see you.
Hey, Todd.
Thanks for tuning in. So to kind of get to the theme of our conversation today about how AI can help us to build micro empires and have macro impact of things. How is AI helping smaller teams to move and compete with maybe even big enterprises at this point? Like how can I, as a small-time entrepreneur, take advantage of the AI tool sets that are available?
It's really interesting in kind of working with AI and making that sort of a reality, right? Like building your micro empire. So one of the things I've noticed is that we're being given all this power, but if you don't know how to handle that power, it won't matter. And it kind of reminds me of like even when the invention of the printing press, right? When knowledge started to be disseminated and people thought, oh, it's access to information that is key, to improving things. If that were true, then everybody on the planet right now, we'd essentially all be super smart, super enlightened, and clearly that's not the case. When the internet came about, we got even more access to information and connection. And has it helped us as a whole? Debatable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We're doing more things, but I forgot the name of that principle, right? But like it's like when you free up time, you tend to fill it up with more things, right? And I think we're experiencing the same thing again with AI. So how does that translate to business? With AI, if you don't know how to deal with other human beings to begin with, right? We're talking about clear instructions, right? Working with AI is like working with human teams. And essentially, if you first don't know how to hire, there's also some very interesting about like the whole hiring process translates into the way that you onboard AI or integrate with AI, right? I've noticed a lot of similarities. Then if you don't know how to communicate effectively, you'll get frustrated with the AI outputs, right, that you get in return. And so that should be a signal too that you need to learn how to be a more effective human communicator, because that impacts what you get from the AI. Because essentially, if you get this technology, right, and you're trying to use it to make you more efficient, help you get better, but then you find yourself spending more time trying to fix bugs and all that sort of stuff, right? It's something that you would still experience with a human team. So I've noticed that the ones who are able to build an AI team around them are the ones that are already effective with human teams, or might even have like a natural capacity to do that, right? It translates. And so now we are seeing, though, that people who have both the intelligence and the street smarts, they're able to learn quickly and integrate the AI agents specifically to build these automated teams around them, right? To help do the things that just one person alone couldn't do, or even a small human team couldn't do on their own. And so the power, I think, in AI is that you can actually train it to be the equivalent of about 5 human beings, right? If you're using agents and things around you. And I'm seeing some amazing results already.
That's incredible, Matt. So, so I want to ask this question because this has been on my mind this past week or so. I'm seeing more situations now where, like, I think Google is kind of releasing its ultra tools that are available. There are major agentic plays with Microsoft right now. It seems like AI is trying to fit into the enterprise a lot more. And the price points for those things are, I would say, almost absolutely out of the price range of startup entrepreneurs to work with. Are we seeing the start of a new disparity between the AI tools for everybody else and the AI tools for these large enterprises? Are we going to be at a disadvantage because of that? Like I'm a little anxious about that situation.
Yes and no. I mean, I still see enterprises like they have access to the tools, but it's the same issue I saw when trying to roll out any new tool or technology to enterprise. You're given the power, but like, can you leverage that power effectively, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm noticing that there's a lot of buzz right around AI, but if you look practically at how the human beings in those organizations are using it, it's still for very basic things. It's like, refine my Gmail. You have the power of AI right there. And it's like, refine the way that I say this to my colleague that I like or don't like. It's quite basic still. So I think it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be more interesting, I think, over the next 5 years, once we see truly autonomous agents taking actions for us. And there are pockets of this already happening. And from the enterprise space, I would say there's been waves. In the early days of the internet, we saw enterprises, universities get first access to more advanced technologies. Things got democratized, they got cheaper. Then we saw that it was more the consumer that was getting access to things and leveraging it far more effectively than enterprise, because enterprise was too slow half the time. Now we might be seeing sort of a swing back again, that in terms of enterprise getting access to the resources required for more advanced AI. So I'm talking more quantum computing side. And that makes sense, right? But again, I just see this sort of pendulum go back and forth between consumer and enterprise. And to me, that's the way of the universe. There's always this yin yang dance, the swinging back and forth between the haves, the have-nots, the light, the dark, all of those sort of things. So I always try to keep that in mind. I'm very big on paying attention to natural rhythms and cycles. I think that is interestingly going to play a much larger part in the way that we potentially harmonize with AI. And this is why I talk about alignment more, because it's not just access or connection, right? It's alignment, because you can get access to all these things, but if you are not aligned, you're not working on the right things, right? It won't matter, right? You'll still find yourself stuck in potentially analog style issues, but now you're just getting over to it.
Well, so let's go a little deeper with that conversation about alignment, because I know that one of your entrepreneurial efforts right now is the culture stack, which is really about helping people and enterprises think more clearly about the tools that they're using day to day to get work done, and sort of like how you limit that, how you align it to the things that you need to do. I'm not going to do justice talking about it, but
No worries.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I know I've gone through that process to some extent with you, talking about my own tool sets. And it was very clarifying to do that. But what gave you the idea for this?
Yeah, so I think in all my time working with different size businesses, from solo to startup all the way up to enterprise and government, I've noticed that no matter the tool or technology, there are these human parts that will impact our ability to adopt something new or not, right? And a lot of focus is often put on, oh, it's a lack of resources. Oh, it's a lack of change management. Oh, it's, maybe people just don't feel smart enough, right? Confidence levels. There's a lot of things going on in the background of people's minds that will, of course, influence whether they take on a new tool or technology or not, right? And I try not to blame people, right, when it comes to this, because we just don't know what's going on in their lives, right? And so for Culture Stack, that was the original concept. There's been so many developments since then, right? But for the original concept of Culture Stack, which was maybe 18 to 24 months ago now, the whole idea was to essentially look at the tools and technologies that are being used and ask, hey, can we actually derive a lot of information just from people's choices of tools or technologies, and understand their culture at a behavioral level, beyond what I think we still rely on when it comes to, say, employee surveys, those sort of things. That was like kind of the first question. I was like, hey, can I just look at these tools and technologies and get a good overall scan of what's going on in that company? Because I essentially was doing that intuitively with many companies. Whenever I would go into a company, I would start with a question like, hey, are you guys Microsoft oriented or Apple oriented? Right? That very first question would tell me a lot about what I could expect from that culture. Then if you go into the hiring space, right, or hiring teams, you'll notice that, when I was working in corporate, a lot of candidates would ask, hey, do you guys, use these certain tools? And essentially, if they didn't, the candidate was already in their minds judging that company, right, as either old school or, with the times. And so those are very subtle cues, or subtle things that people will use as a way to make these judgments on culture and values. Then I think over time, what I discovered or realized is that the cultural values aspect, these are important, but there's something else that is going on beneath the surface. And I'll probably need to do another catch up with you separately so I can show you the latest with all this. But
yeah, for sure.
I spoke about the cognition level, right? And I think something that has become very clear in my work with stacks in general, and sort of using stacks as a way to determine culture and values, is that there is a massive sort of cognitive tax that is taking place with all of these tools. And I've seen it happen more and more with AI tools. Mm-hmm. So each new tool that enters our space, it's essentially taking a slot in our cognitive area, right? And every time it does that, I like to call it a cognitive tax, right? And we don't realize the impact that it has on us on a day-to-day basis, right? And that MIT study that we spoke about before kind of hints or touches on that aspect, but it's still kind of like this black box area. And we don't actually have a way to guard against it. We just are bombarded with new tools, or forced by our clients or, our organizations that we may work for, and we just have to adopt, right? And as a result of this sort of cognitive tax, I realized that under all these other tech stacks, the main stack is the cognitive stack, right? Which is what I like to call layer 0. And so what I found myself focusing more on is that layer 0 as the base stack that needs to be addressed, but we use the tools as the mirrors of that in order to see what's going on with layer 0. So that's been, I think, the biggest insight is that our tools and our tech stack choices are the mirror of our own cognitive inner workings, right? Maybe even our cognitive biases. Um, and it's a way in to understand that aspect. And the basic theory is that if we shift the external stack, we can actually help move the cognitive stack, layer zero. And it's very similar to like, I use my wife as an analogy, but if she's perhaps feeling low, she will change like the color of her outfits on the outside, and it kind of helps shift things on the inside for her.
Sure, sure.
Right?
It's the whole dress for success mentality, right?
100%. They're both connected, and also sometimes just how you're feeling in general will influence what you decide to wear. So if you're feeling dark and gloomy, you'll choose darker colors, right? And a lot of times these are unconscious things. So it's the same principle, a theory that I'm applying to tools. It's just that we don't usually look at our tools in that same way. We don't arrange our tools, our apps like we might our own physical things in our house, right? And so that was the sort of the whole development. So it actually started out as culture stack, but everybody kept thinking it was an HR tool, and I was like, no, it's not an HR tool. So I ended up like squeezing it down to C stack, and then when I squeezed it down to C stack, I realized, oh, I've already started with the end in mind. There's something missing, and that's what led me to the cognitive layer zero, and then that's how the actual framework system got developed under conscious stack design. So if you go to consciousstack.com or consciousstackdesign.com, that's where sort of the system methodology framework lives now. And that's a thing that underpins the actual platform. And right now, the actual platform side, that's something that's more about my long-term vision. People can sign up for beta and get access to that now. But with AI proliferating, there are some manual things that now I've been doing with clients, right, around the conscious stack concept to help people with layer zero first. Because all the other stuff I realize is that if I build another tool, I'm adding to the cognitive tax.
Sure. Yes, okay. Absolutely. So, I mean, it really is an inundation of tools, and
yes.
and the tools that we use, I know from my own experience, it tends to be quite fluid. So
yes.
Tools that have entered my workflow space recently that I'm not sure if they have a permanent place in my usage would be things like Gamma app or Manus, or Koros, which you introduced me to. And I'm finding probably not Koros because that hasn't fit with my work, but like Manus has been really interesting with some of the things that I need to do. And but then you're right, there really is that cognitive load every time you're bringing something new into the stack, because then you're like, okay, what tool do I need to use for this? How do I make it work? It almost feels like evolutionary forces at work upon us at an individual level.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting part about this is that in working with tech more and more, I'm realizing just how advanced some of these other religions, cultures, groups from the past were, right? Because if you look, if you look at Vedic traditions, right, or you look at across Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, a lot of what they do with meditation, breathing, all this sort of stuff, right? Which now, right, like science is being like, oh, there's all these benefits to meditation. We know this, right? But if you look at the way that some of these older cultures documented it and still practice, but like in the caves or out in remote areas, they are working on the inner systems, right? The biological technology, which is probably the better for us to focus on, right? Because that mastery of our physical bodies, that's the primary tech. What I realize is the things that we are creating, we are trying to cheat, right? To make it faster. And of course, we've done amazing things with technology already, but it's making me respect a lot of these sort of traditions more and more. And they exist on every single continent, right? Because essentially, they're hacking their own biosystems, right? And if you kind of brought some of them into the modern world, they would probably have better discipline on their minds than we do, even though we have access to all this technology all the time, right? Because I was watching this movie about Bolivar, the leader for what was it they called it, New Colombia back in the day, which included Venezuela and all the other surrounding countries, right? But back in the day, they did not have all our technology, and yet they were able to coordinate human beings across many lands, armies, all of this sort of stuff. And we struggle with just notifications and things on our laptops, our computers, right? We have communication issues. There's something we're missing fundamentally, right? That the technology is just magnifying and potentially making worse.
Yeah. It can often feel like you're at the all-you-can-eat buffet and they keep shoving food in your face.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that I come at it from as you're talking to me about this, I think about the Stoics. Philosophically, they were talking about managing your own expectations and trying to recognize that outside forces should not be impacting your personal tranquility around things. Same thing as you were relating it to other religions or spiritual practices, worldwide. There is something there. There's civilizations that lasted a lot longer than ours have so far. They were just as smart as, if not smarter than us in many ways.
Exactly. And I think, just context, right? Different times, right? And, even in quantum physics, they talk about how essentially, we kind of know intellectually that time is a human construct, right? But I think why I find quantum physics fascinating is that they look at time and sort of the multiverse, right? And every time we're doing something, there's all the possibilities are essentially happening at the same time. And the past and even the future only exists in the present in our minds, right? And so if you take in these sort of concepts, when we are looking at evolution, I think in the West, we look at time as a linear thing, but a lot of ancient cultures, they look at time as cyclical. And so it's quite possible that we come back to a same point, right? But of course, with different experiences. And so if we look at the past, the peoples that lived during those times, they could have had the same intelligence, right? But they were just at a different level, right? And it's quite possible that sometimes you're not always going up, that you could spiral down, right? That you can devolve as well. It's of course it's possible. But I think when it comes to translating that for us now, for businesses, for micro empires, these sort of things, I sort of started the concept of the Micro Empires newsletter. So it's microempires.cc. That's where the newsletter lives. But the inspiration was I was noticing as I was working with tech that tech is a great lever, right? So you can get a lot of really good leverage if you know what you're doing. And micro empires in the real world, right? So these are small nations who punch way above their weight. Singapore, Switzerland, so many other small countries, even England, Great Britain, right? They were essentially an island nation. They went to colonize the world. There are so many examples of these smaller players who have gone on to do large things, great things, simply by leveraging their strengths. And so that was the inspiration for micro empires as a concept, because I was seeing that that's happening with AI and the latest tools. And essentially, there was a lot more focus on the micropreneur. And this is different to the solopreneur, where the micropreneur often will have a team of around 10 or less. And you can essentially recreate that type of team with AI. Now, I think it's important to still have other humans, but that's what's happening.
Yeah. So I'm reminded, and I want to bring this back around to what the theme of our show is, talk about your
community. That's why I was thinking
bringing that up. Yeah, I mean, I think I think many community professionals would readily say that they are a team of one within their organization, that they're running these teams on their own.
Yeah.
Like as let's say you're in that situation, you are a community manager for a mid-sized to large B2B or nonprofit community, and you suddenly now have some of these AI tools to look at. Like, what kind of tools or use cases should I be looking at to think about being productive in those spaces? Like, how do I augment myself, by 5 or 10 times by using some of these AI tools that are available?
Yeah, it is one of those things. I think this is why I probably, in terms of the formal profession of the community manager, right? We saw how it kind of wasn't really valued as much, right? When during COVID, all the layoffs happened. I mean, everybody was kind of getting laid off, right? But community teams were definitely one of the first, right? Because when times are good, community is like, oh yeah, this is really nice to have and we can afford it. Like, let's bring them on, right? But then when times are hard, it's not seen as essential, right? And I think I've noticed a lot of community professionals who have struggled with the basic business metrics and even sometimes these technical aspects. So what that did for me, even though I had a career as a community manager from startups to corporate, right? I noticed that I tried to look at my day-to-day objectively. And I looked at, these activities actually do fit quite nicely into these traditional departments. So I just started to go, look, I know that community seeps into everything. I know it's important, but I have to translate it into these traditional boxes, right? And what I found too for me is that when it comes to tech, a lot of people love talking about the tools, right? And there's a lot of focus on it, but the deeper work is always beyond the tools, right? But you have to start somewhere, and you have to start with where people feel like they have the most pressing need. So I think when it comes to using the tech to better leverage a community professional's time, you really have to look at, kind of audit your own processes, right? Your own activities, and then the tools. So this is what I do with clients now. So I've got this stack map template. And essentially what I'll do is I'll get out the whiteboard and I'll essentially just get the client to just speak to me about all of what they're doing currently in their business, right? Or in their team. And I'll list it all out so that they can see and feel the extent of their problems, right? And this is where it's like going back to the analog stuff that's really helpful. So doing that simple process allows them to see like, oh gosh, I have all of these things that I'm doing. These are all the processes. These are people that it touches. I didn't realize there was this much. At the beginning, sometimes when I ask them, they're like, oh yeah, I'm only doing these things. But as I go through that, just talking it out, they realize, oh God, there's a lot more. Exactly. It stacks, right? And so then I will have the conversation about the tools. So, when I first started with the concept for Culture Stack, I was starting with the tools, right? But then, you put it out into the real world and you start to see where the holes are, right? In some of the assumptions. And so then I'll layer on the tools. So I say, okay, for each of these activities, what tool are you using, right? So then they'll tell me. And then they realize, holy cow, I'm using a lot of tools. And often they'll tell me that they're only using maybe 4 to 8 tools. So this is that cognitive limit that I was speaking about, right? Where I think Miller's law states that most human beings, we can only remember around 7 things plus or minus 2 up or down for any given subject area or category, right? And this is where all the other stuff creeps in, because then when you map it out, you start to realize, oh, there's way more than just 7 here. 7 tools that are being used, right?
Right.
So once we do that, this is where we start to actually start to audit things, because then we can look at, okay, how much are you paying for each of these tools, etc. Right? There are many tools that actually automate this for you, but I notice that human beings need to feel this stuff. Because there becomes a disconnect when you bring in the tools, it magnifies everything, and when you stop feeling problems, you start becoming, what's the word? You start becoming numb to them, and you
Yeah.
can't resonate anymore with the problems of your teams and the people around you, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so for community folks, I would start there versus what is common is like, hey, try this tool because I use it or it's popular,
Yeah.
right? And that's actually not the best way to go. And this is where the alignment part comes in, and why I'm big on it now, because I think we need to start getting more conscious or intentional about how we're choosing these tools. What's popular is not always what's true, and this is a famous saying that I often come back to when dealing with a lot of things online. You could apply this even to social media sentiment, right? What's popular isn't always what's true. And so you cannot dig in and fix things unless you have visibility and then feel it as a human being. And this is where, as a human being, we have to engage all our senses with all of this stuff. And I think again, going back to a lot of these, older cultures, right? Older wisdom, it is about learning to re-engage with all of us, as a whole, as technology becomes more and more of a thing in our world. But I think for community professionals and the choosing of tools, that's a process that I would recommend. If you go to consciousstack.com and under stack maps, or I think /stack.maps, there's a template that I have there that will help you just sort of like organize things or map it out if you want. And yeah, that's often now where I begin with clients because I found that it's just a very useful exercise to start getting a handle or a feel on the tools that are in your cognitive space. And then I'll recommend the other tools, to sort of streamline, automate the rest because there's many options, but we all kind of have a style. And that's where, again, Culture Stack, your collection of tools is revealing your style of tooling.
Absolutely. And as someone who's gone through it myself, at least in an earlier iteration, of it,
Yeah.
It was illuminating to start to understand like what it said about me and how I like to work or how I prefer to work. And you're right. Like the latest and greatest tool isn't necessarily something that's going to be right for your particular work style and what you do.
Yeah.
I know, like for me, for example, Notion is a very popular platform. I've never found it like grabbing me, recognizing fully that it's a really powerful tool and can do a lot potentially for me. Maybe there's a mental barrier that I have towards using that, but I find myself leaning into other things that I think are probably a little simpler to work with, but actually, anthropologically speaking, it's just not something that I have, that I'm at the right maturity level to use, at the moment. So.
And that's exactly it. And this is why I call it conscious stacks, right? Because essentially you need to be made conscious of your own stacks, because then that will reveal all the new tools, how to choose the new tools that come into your world. Because that's actually what has popped up with clients. In one of my other AI coaching calls, the client was asking, or they're a very savvy business owner, and they were like, I don't necessarily want to know what tool I should use, what AI tool I should use, but I kind of want more insights into how to choose these AI tools, right? And I said, okay, I got you. And that's where this entire process helped a lot because we went through it. Then I was able to get a full view of their stack, and that stack gives me insights into their mindset, but also their style, right? Because essentially the tools you are choosing is dictating your style, and then that can be used to actually choose the AI tool. So regardless of the tech wave, if you know what your preferences are, your tools are, your stack, then you can more easily make decisions on those new tools that come in because they'll better align with your own stack.
I love it, man. Hard to believe an hour has gone by. I always so enjoy talking to you, George. We range from philosophy and history to modern technology and entrepreneurship. It's always a great conversation. A quick question before we go. I like to do sort of a lightning round question that I've been asking everybody lately. If there were a term or buzzword that you wish that you could banish from our business conversations, What would that be? Do you have any top of mind pet peeves lately?
Oh my gosh. That's a really good question. Banish. I mean, with each tech wave, it's always like buzzwords always pop up, right?
They do.
And I don't know if it's a word or a phrase or more of a approach I wish, or okay, maybe it's more of a reaction that I wish was banished. But it's, as soon as things get popular, like, and I see this even in the executive suite, right?
Yeah.
When blockchain, crypto, Web3, right, was hot, it's like every executive was like, we need blockchain. And it's like, okay, why? I have no idea why, but everybody's talking about it. And so we need it, right? And I see the same thing again with AI. It's like, we need AI. Okay, why? I don't know, but everybody's talking about it, so we should have it. So you know what I mean? So it's not
Yes.
necessarily like the word, but it's that same reaction to these things.
Totally. It's the keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I wish was banished. But I get it. I get like why it happens, but it can get super annoying sometimes for me because I'm looking at like just how the markets react, right? And essentially, like even in AI, I see a lot of folks in the corporate world on LinkedIn. They'll put like, I've done this certification, for AI, and as if that's a virtue signal for mastery. I think what we're learning is that certificates is not how you master things in tech, because the way we're learning and the way that we're being educated is changing. So there's a lot of things that are happening in real time with AI that is hard to surmise in a certificate, right? Because the benefits is not from completing an exam around this stuff, but it's always the application. I get why it exists. It's part of our traditions, right? But yeah, it's frustrating to see sometimes that that's the focus of success, right? Is a completion of a certificate. Again, not saying that's a bad thing. I know why it's there, right. But I see the big discrepancies between what is shared or understood through certificates versus getting into the weeds sometimes of especially AI. Like there are some things that I think I have understood about AI intimately because I've gone into the coding side. Again, not everybody's like this, but by going into it, I am feeling the problems, right? And it's always that thing between like theory and practice, right? It's like if you go study law, okay, great. You might have your degree or your certificates, but until you practice it, you won't have the pattern recognition that comes through experience, right? To be able to give advice, to be able to make better decisions, those sort of things. And I think, again, this goes back to the basics of human beings and how we value certain things versus actually apply it in the world. And this is probably why we have a lot of knowledge out, not a lot of wisdom. And I think that has remained the same for centuries, it looks like. Because if you go back to Aristotle, Plato, these folks, some of the things that they were talking about then, we're still doing today, that they criticized back then. But
it's true. Absolutely.
But we're better. We're doing better.
George, thanks so much for being on the show. I think we have to leave here with a great note to leave things on. We have miles to go to get more wisdom in our lives, and you are certainly adding to our store of wisdom through all the work that you're doing, my friend. Love to have you back on the show anytime. And in the meantime, those of you that tuned in and stayed with us for the hour, I hope you stayed with us for the hour. It was a wonderful conversation. You can follow and like the show both here on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube, where our entire back catalog of conversations is available. And again, I'll remind you, if you're a podcast sort of person, we're putting the show out via audio as well. So you can listen to us in the gym or while you're mowing the lawn or where, taking a walk on the beach, wherever you happen to be. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves, take the weekend off, get away from the screen, get in touch with those inner systems of yourself. And we will see you back here in 2 weeks with Dr. Ruth Diaz on July the 25th. In the meantime, keep building great communities. Kalisa, let's roll the credits. Thanks, George.